Could you explain redemptive suffering and how it can help to the betterment of our universe as we know it? So there's a question about suffering, the redemptive aspect of it, and how that fits into the whole idea of God's universe.
Yeah, there's, in the Christian tradition, or directly, literally from the words of Jesus himself, there are three dimensions to redeeming suffering. I mean, suffering will always be ultimately redeemed in the kingdom of heaven, where there will be, all tears will be wiped away, right, in the book of Revelations, or as St. Paul would say it in the letter to the Romans, where the entire creation is going to be brought to its fruition, where there's not going to be any suffering anymore. So let's call that the ultimate redemption of suffering. But there are three other ways in which suffering right now in this world, before the ultimate redemption, can also be redemptive. And Jesus talks about these. The first thing that suffering does is it can shock us out of a superficial and a destructive way of life. So we find, a lot of time, maybe a person has an alcohol addiction, or somebody has, a destructive form of life, and all of a sudden they find themselves, in catastrophe after catastrophe, or maybe the family's breaking up, or something's happening, or maybe they get a physical disease or physical impairment, and all of a sudden it causes them to think, was all this ego comparative happiness, or was all this, materialism, was this real happiness? Is that all there is? In other words, suffering has this incredibly poignant effect, right? It just kind of zeroes us into that question, is this all there is to life? And if we're really answering that question correctly, then of course we're going to see in a heartbeat, there's got to be something more. And God then, honestly, can lead us through suffering right out of a self-destructive path, right out of a superficial path where we're just wasting our lives and wasting our dignity completely, can lead us, right? The Holy Spirit can drive a Mack truck full of grace through the holes in our hearts, right? And all of a sudden bring us to a place we never thought of before. Contributive meaning in life, ultimate meaning in life, transcendent meaning in life, religious meaning in life. The Christian meaning of life, we can be led there through precisely suffering from a point of darkness and superficiality. So that's one thing that's very prominent in the Christian tradition about redemption. There are two other strands that are really important. There's a second strand which just talks about the purification of love, so that suffering can actually help us to purify our love. It's like purgation, like what we say in Catholicism about purgatory, right? That the idea is that we can be purged of what we might call inordinate attachments to this world, so that we are seeking first the kingdom, but we're doing it exactly as Jesus describes it in the Beatitudes. So he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. That means the humble-hearted. Let me tell you, without suffering, there's just no way I would be pursuing humble-heartedness. I mean, honest to goodness, I would be just in the darkness of pride. And even St. Paul says this in just a beautiful passage in 2 Corinthians 12, where he says, I was given, a thorn in the flesh, an angel of Satan to beat me, to keep me from getting proud. In other words, he's so scared of humility. And he says, I asked 3 times. That means over and over and over again, right to the point, of like 1,000 times, that the Lord relieve me from this. But he chose not to. But I found that in my weakness is my strength. So all of a sudden, Paul is giving us this direction. There are many things far worse than suffering, many things far worse than pain. And what's worse than that? The darkness of sin, the darkness of pride, the darkness of narcissism, the darkness of egocentricity, the darkness of dominating others, the darkness that is so deep that we can't even get ourselves out of our own self-involvement. And then the blessedness of suffering. that, you know, this thorn in the flesh, this angel of Satan to beat me, and all of a sudden, wake up time. I've got this idea that Christ is growing stronger in me through my suffering. He's taking over, and I don't have to be Mr. Arrogant anymore, right? I don't have to be Mr. Narcissist anymore. I can start being gentle-hearted. The call to gentle-heartedness comes oftentimes through suffering. This idea of purification of love, the idea of the call to compassion many times comes through our own suffering.
Right.
We have empathy then for the sufferings of others.
Right.
The call to, to be aware of peace in the world and to be aware of Jesus's ideas of righteousness or holiness frequently comes through suffering. It's not just a wake-up call. Right. It's literally this continuous process of purification. And the third major strand of redemptive suffering in Christianity before ultimate redemption is the one given by Therese of Lisieux that we just talked about, that Jesus teaches us that we can offer up our sufferings as he did on the cross to the Father as an act of self-sacrificial love for the redemption of the world. We have no idea the good that can come from our suffering because God's in control of that. God's the one redeeming it. God's the one using it for the redemption of the world. We don't know. You have to be as humble as Therese of Lisieux. But what we can do is we can offer that up in complete trust, as Therese of Lisieux did, as a self-oblation to God, as literally a gift of love to God. Just offer that pain up so that God will transform it into grace and shower it down upon the world, especially for the souls in most need of his mercy in purgatory on this earth. And of course, all of these areas of redemptive suffering are like positives. And then where does it all lead? To ultimate redemption of our suffering in the kingdom of heaven. So, I mean, the Christian tradition is so rich. And at the Magis Institute, of course, on the website, we give not only talk about this, but we give all kinds of lessons on how to suffer well, how they can transform, right, their sufferings into real redemption toward love, redemption in faith, redemption toward, as Paul says, escaping from pride and narcissism, redemption of the world through our pain and our grief. All of these things are so rich that we have to teach not only our mature Christians, but especially our younger Christian members and Catholic members. We got to teach them how to do this well so that they have these things in the forefront of their mind. So instead of wasting their sufferings by complaining or turning inward or rejecting God and the church, they move in precisely the opposite direction, straight into the arms of God through love and holiness. And that's what God is asking us to do as educators within the Catholic Church.